Hilchos Shabbos, Perek Shloshim. The Laws of Shabbos, chapter 30. Today is a big day, a happy day, a day of celebration, a day that concludes an entire month of studying one section of the Rambam, the section dedicated to the laws of Shabbat. As the Rebbe once said, this Perek, the chapter that we're going to learn today, is the Sach HaKol. It serves as the grand summary of everything that we've learned in the last month, essentially, and it deals with the main obligations that a person has generally on the Shabbos, which is called kavod ve'oneg, honoring the Shabbos and bringing it pleasure. We've talked about the biblical obligations of Shabbat, resting and not doing work, and making kiddush and all of those things until now. And now we conclude this chapter with the attitude that a person has to have rabbinically, which is called honoring the Shabbos and bringing it pleasure, as the Rambam will detail all the laws that relate to this. Halacha Aleph, let's go for it. Arba'a dvarim ne'emru b'Shabbat. There are four things stated about the Shabbos. Shnayim min Torah u'shnayim midivrei sofrim. Two biblical and two rabbinic. The hein mefurashin al yedei nevi'im, and the rabbinic obligations have been made clear by the prophets already. Shabbat Torah. The two statements about Shabbos in the Torah are Zachor v'Shamor. 10 commandments are repeated twice in the Torah with slight variations. In the first version, in Sefer Shmot, it says Zachor et Yom HaShabbat lekadsho. Remember the Shabbos day, mention it. The second one says Shamor, observe the Shabbos, guard it. One is a reference to the rules related to work, and one is a reference to the rules related to Kiddush, as we learned yesterday. The other two things about Shabbos that were stated by the prophets is kavod ve'oneg, is honor and pleasure. Shene'emar, as it says, and this is a verse which we actually say before the Shabbat Kiddush on Shabbos day, comes from the Sefer of Yeshaya, Isaiah the prophet, chapter 58. Shene'emar, as it says, v'karata la Shabbat oneg, you shall call the Shabbos a day of pleasure, v'likdosh Hashem mechubad, and the day that's holy to God, you should call it honorable. So here we see the expression of pleasure and honor related to the Shabbos. The truth is that in the Talmud, these last three words, likdosh Hashem mechubad, are used as a reference to Yom Kippur. And the obligation of honoring Shabbos comes from the next word, which you see on the screen, b'chibadato. You have to honor the Shabbos. The commentaries wonder why the Rambam over here chooses this one. The Rebbe once pointed out, it's interesting, the Rambam, he was such a man of precision. But when he writes it on his own, he says, kavod ve'oneg, first honor, then pleasure. When he quotes the verse says first pleasure, then honor. Shouldn't the Rambam follow the verse? So the Rebbe says the Rambam wrote a practical handbook of Jewish law. We're going to see that kavod begins on Friday. Oneg more begins closer to Shabbat than on Shabbat itself. So practically, the order is going to happen where you're going to first honor the Shabbos and then pleasure the Shabbos. In the verse is talking about Shabbos inherently. Shabbos inherently is a day of pleasure. As a result of that, we have to also honor it. So it first mentions pleasure, then honor. But the Rambam, in his practical guide, writes the way that it happens practically, honoring and then pleasuring. It actually kind of fits the whole way of Hilchos Shabbat. We began with the laws of Friday and then going into the laws of Shabbat. Halacha bet ezehu kavod. What is considered to be honor? How do we honor the Shabbos? Zeh she'amru chachamim. It's what the sages told us. Shemitzvah al adam, that it's a commandment upon the person. Lirchotz panav yadav v'raglav b'chamin be'erev Shabbat. The person should wash his face, hands, and feet in hot water on the eve of Shabbos on Friday. Mipnei kvod Shabbat, in order to honor the Shabbos. Umitatev b'tzitzit. The person should wrap himself in the clothing with tzitzit, a talis. V'yoshev b'koved rosh, and sit in a solemn state, waiting to greet the Shabbos as one would go out to greet a king. The early sages would gather their students around them on the eve of Shabbos. They would wrap themselves in a talis and they would say, Bo v'neitzei likrat Shabbat hamelech. Let's go. Come, let's go to greet the Shabbos king. Interesting. We know Shabbos is Shabbos queen, Shabbat hamalka. Here the Rambam refers to it as Shabbat hamelech, Shabbat the king. Halacha Gimel u'mikvod Shabbat, also included in the honoring of the Shabbos, is sheyilbash ksut nikiya, that a person should wear clean clothes. V'lo yiyeh malbush hachol kemalbush haShabbat. The clothes you wear during the weekday should not be the clothes you wear on Shabbos. V'im ein lo lahachlif, if you have nothing to change. People were very poor in those days. They didn't have new garments for Shabbos. Mishal shel talito, you should let your cloak drape longer on Shabbos than you do during the week. Kedei shelo yehei malbusho kemalbush hachol. So in some way, the clothing you're wearing on Shabbos shouldn't be the same clothing as the weekday. The Ezra the scribe, who brought the Jews to build the second temple in Israel, he enacted that people should do laundry on Thursday to honor the Shabbos. For this purpose, to have clean clothes, do laundry. Not on Friday though, when it's very busy, do it on Thursday. Halacha dalid asur likboa seuda umishteh be'erev Shabbat mipnei kvod Shabbat. Another part of honoring Shabbos is that you don't make a huge meal or a feast on the eve of Shabbos in order to honor the Shabbos. So you should come in with an appetite, enjoy the Shabbos meal. Umutar le'echol v'lishtot ad shetechshach. Although you could eat and drink till it gets dark. Don't make a meal out of it though. Ba'afal pikei, nevertheless, mikvod Shabbat, it's a part of honoring Shabbos, she'imana adam min hamincha u'lemala milikboa seuda, that from the moment that you can daven mincha, and this means the second mincha. Remember the laws of prayer, we had the mincha gedolah and the mincha ketana. The greater mincha, the earlier mincha, half an hour after midday, and the mincha ketana, which is 3 hours later. That's what we're referring to over here. But 9.5 hours into the day, a person should stop himself from making a meal. So you go into Shabbos in a state of desiring to eat. Halacha he, misader adam shulchano be'erev Shabbat. A person should set his table on Friday. Even though you know that you only need to eat a tiny bit of food. Set your whole table, bedek it, make it beautiful. You should also set your table when Shabbos exits. Even though you're only going to need an olive size of food. So you honor it both when it comes in and when it goes out. You also have to clean your house while it's still day. Shabbat is part of honoring Shabbos. You should also have a candle that's lit. And a set table to eat. And the bedspread should be made. Either it refers to the actual bed or to the bed that they used to recline on while eating. Because all of these are included in the honor of Shabbos. Here the Rambam alludes to what I mentioned way back in chapter 5 about the Shabbos candles. They aren't there just to serve the meal. The candles that are lit inherently are a part of honoring the Shabbos. Even if you are a very important person, and typically you don't do the grocery shopping. You don't go to the market and buy things. You don't deal with housework. You should still, with your own body, do things that help prepare for Shabbos. Because that's part of your own honor, not the honor of Shabbos. Shabbos is a feminine word. It would say shazeu kvoda. Your honor. You say you're an important person. Part of your honor is to honor the Shabbos. Chachamim harishonim, the earliest sages, they would actually get involved. Physical preparations. Mehem mishayam mefatzela yitzim lefashel bahen. Some of them would chop the wood to use for cooking. Umehen mishayam mevashel. Some would cook themselves. Omoleach basar. Some would salt the meat. Ogodel ptilot. Some would weave the wicks. Omadlik nerot, or actually light the candles. Not the Shabbat candles, but the ones around the home, which would be there to light up the home. Some would go out to the market and buy things, things that were needed for Shabbos, food and drink, even though typically it wasn't his way. Anybody who increases in this act is actually more praiseworthy. It's a part of honoring Shabbos to do so. That's all the laws of honor. What is called pleasure. It's what the sages said. You have to prepare a very fatty cooked dish, and a very pleasantly odored wine or liquid drink for Shabbos. Everything according to what a person can afford. Good food. A person who increases in what he spends for Shabbos and what he spends in preparing beautiful foods and many foods, you're praiseworthy. If you don't have the money, you can't afford it. Even if you only made a little cooked vegetable stew. For the honor of Shabbos, when you eat it, that's considered pleasuring in the Shabbos. There is no obligation to pain yourself and borrow from others in order to increase the foods for Shabbos. Unlike, let's say, the Shabbos candles where you have to borrow money. Here you don't borrow money. The early sages said, better make your Shabbos into a weekday and not require yourself to come onto the financial capacities of others. Don't put yourself into debt for it. Though the Talmud does say, Levu alai v'ani poreya. Hashem says you can borrow money on my account for spending on Shabbos. It's not part of the money that's allotted to every person on Rosh Hashanah. You can borrow and spend more on Shabbos. Hashem will pay you back. But don't go crazy. Okay, so at a certain point you have to understand that you don't go crazy for spending for Shabbat. Rather make your Shabbos more weekday-like without bringing yourself to need other people's gifts. Halacha chet. Misha haya anog ve'ashir. A person who was very rich, and he loved to give himself pleasure. Very indulgent. All his days are like Shabbos. He eats festive meals all week long. He also must change the food he eats on Shabbos from the food he eats during the weekday. If you can't change the menu, at least change the time when you eat. If you usually eat early, eat later. You usually eat later, eat earlier. Talking about eating, says the Rambam, a person has an obligation to eat 3 meals every Shabbos. Achat arvit, v'achat shacharit, v'achat b'mincha. One in the evening, one in the morning, and one in the afternoon time. We actually learned this from the man. The first time the Jews got bread, as the Jewish people, bread from heaven, there was many instructions when it came to Shabbos. Every day they got 1 portion. On Friday they got 2 portions. And they had 1 portion for Friday. The next day they came to Moshe and said, what should we do with the 2nd portion? So Moshe said, Ichluhu hayom, eat it today. Ki Shabbat hayom la'Hashem, today is Shabbos for God. Hayom lo timtza'u basadeh, today you're not going to find it in the field. You have to eat the man from yesterday. 3 times the word hayom. You see in red, hayom, hayom, hayom. From there we derive 3 meals on the Shabbos. Tzarich li'zaher. B'shalosh sudot elu, you have to be very careful about these 3 meals. Shalo yivchot me'an klal, never to decrease from their amount. Don't eat less than 3 meals. Even if you're a poor person who requires for his sustenance to take tzedakah, so ed shalosh seudot, he should indulge in 3 full meals on the Shabbos. But if you were very sick from too much food, or you were in a state of constant fasting, eating too much was against your custom of fasting, patur mishalosh seudot. He's exempt from eating these 3 meals. Each one of the 3 meals has to begin with wine. You have to break bread over 2 breads, what's called lechem mishneh. The same thing with holidays. As we spoke in Hilchot Brachot, there's 2 elements of lechem mishneh. A Shabbos element and a meal element. The meal of Shabbat requires 2, Shabbos meal requires 2. So the Rambam mentions the obligation of lechem mishneh both here and there. Nevertheless, bottom line, the mitzvah is to have a cup of wine before and 2 loaves of bread. Eating meat on Shabbos and drinking wine on Shabbos is part of the way that we pleasure it. That's provided that you can afford it. However, you cannot make your meal over wine on Shabbos and on Yom Tov at a time dedicated to studying Torah in the communal study hall. This is how the earliest tzaddikim used to behave. You come to shul in the morning, you daven the morning prayer and the musaf prayer. Come home and have your 2nd meal. Go to shul, study hall to learn. Read the written law, read the oral law till mincha. Then daven mincha. Then establish your 3rd meal over wine, and then keep eating and drinking until Shabbos goes out, at which point you bench, and you make Havdalah, and you go into the new week. Halacha Yud Aleph, another law related to Shabbos, Asur lo la'adam sheyihalech ba'arvei Shabbatot yoter mishalosh parsaot mitchilat hayom. A person cannot travel on Friday more than 3 parsa, a measure of distance, from the beginning of the day. Kedei sheyagia lebeito v'od hayom rav. So that whatever trip you're going to take on Friday will guarantee that you get home while there's still plenty of time during the day. V'yachin se'udah l'Shabbat, so you can properly prepare a meal on Shabbos. Were you allowed to travel from further distances, that would leave your family confused and unaware whether you're coming home for Shabbos, and they won't know whether to prepare food for you. Needless to say, if you were a guest by somebody else's house, that you should make sure to get there early on time. Otherwise you'd embarrass them. They haven't prepared something fitting for the guest. So therefore the rabbi is limited how much you can travel on Friday. Okay, we'll get to this in a moment about today, when in modern days it's not so much about walking, it's more about distance. So if you can reach a distance through driving, it's also okay. It's forbidden to fast, to cry to God, to plead to Him, and to ask for mercy on Shabbos for our personal needs. Even if we're talking about a type of distress, that even the community is granted license to fast publicly and to cry out, to blow shofar, to cry out to Hashem for them. On Shabbos, we don't fast, we don't cry out. Also not on holidays. By the way, even today, on Shabbat, when we say the Mishneh Torah for sick people, we don't say Hashem should send them a blessing and heal them. We say Shabbat hi milizok. It's Shabbat, it's forbidden to cry out. Healing is soon to come, but we don't ask, because we don't ask for personal needs on Shabbos. Chutz, with a couple of exceptions. If a city which was besieged by idol worshippers or surrounded by a flooding river, or a boat which is storming in the sea, we can cry out and blow shofar and make announcements on Shabbos to help them. We can also plead to Hashem and ask for mercy on their behalf. We mentioned this law earlier also in chapter 2. These extreme cases, you're allowed to ask for mercy. You cannot lay a siege on the cities of idol worshippers less than 3 days before Shabbat. It has to begin on Wednesday. We had this law also in chapter 2. Here the Rambam gives us the reason. So the soldiers' minds will be calm by the time Shabbos comes in. And they won't be occupied and preoccupied with thinking about Shabbos and the siege coming together. So you make the siege earlier enough, they can calm down with the siege and have enough time to prepare for Shabbos. It's unbelievable if you think about it. The Jews are at war, and on their minds is Shabbos. You make the siege earlier so they can honor the Shabbos. Tells you how important Shabbos is. You can't get onto a boat ride, a boat trip, less than 3 days before Shabbat. For the same reason. So you'll have enough time to calm your mind before Shabbos, and not be in a state of pain. The first couple of days of a sea trip could be painful. So you give yourself that buffer, and then you go into Shabbos. But if you're journeying on the boat to get to a mitzvah, you can get on a trip even on Friday. You have to verbally contract yourself with the captain to stop on Shabbos, even if he doesn't actually do so. But you did your part. But if you're doing a journey between two cities that are very close, Tzora and Sidon are two classic examples of cities in Lebanon area that were very close. Since you know the distance is so small, even if it's for optional matters, things that are not mitzvah related, you can make the journey on Erev Shabbat. Same applies today. With cars, we know when we're going to get places, so we're allowed to make those journeys even if they're far. But if it's a place where the custom is, the prevailing custom is that nobody gets on trips on Erev Shabbat, ein mafligin. And indeed, even if it's a short trip, we don't begin the trip. Halacha Yudale Tashmish Mita. Marital relations, me'onek Shabbatu, is part of the pleasure of Shabbat. Lefichach, therefore, onat talmidei chachamim abriim, those healthy Torah sages who would spend all week learning Torah, mishamshin milelei Shabbat lelelei Shabbat. Every Friday night was the day that they engaged in conjugal relations with their wives. Umutar liv'ol betula lechatchila b'Shabbat. One can marry a virgin and engage in relations the first time on Friday night. Ve'ein baza lo mishum chovel v'lo mishum tsar la. It doesn't go into the category of making a wound or causing her pain. It's part of a mitzvah. It's allowed to be done on Friday night. And the Rambam now concludes in Halachat Tedvav with a ethical approach, bringing out the greatness of the Shabbos. Let's read it, and then I'll offer you the Rebbe's commentary, wonderful commentary on this halacha. HaShabbat va'avodat kochavim u'mazalot. Shabbos and idol worship. Kol achat mishtehen shkula keneged sh'ar kol mitzvot Torah. Both of these carry the weight equal to every other mitzvah in the Torah. That's how special they are. VaHaShabbat hi ha'ot sheben HaKadosh Baruch Hu u'benenu le'olam. Shabbos is the sign which binds between Hashem and us forever. Lefichach, therefore, kol ha'over al shana mitzvot. When a person transgresses another mitzvah, any of the other 611, hareu bichlal rish'ei Yisrael. He's called wicked, but wicked among the Jews. Aval ha'mechalel Shabbat b'farhesya. But when who violates Shabbos publicly and purposely, defiantly, hareu ke'oved avodat kochavim u'mazalot. He is like one who serves idols. Ushnehem ke'oved kochavim u'mazalot l'chol divreihem. And they're both treated like goyim, like idol worshippers in every matter. That's how extreme Shabbos and idol worship is. Lefichach meshabeach hanavi ve'omer. That's why, specifically when it comes to Shabbos, Shabbos is singled out for praise by the prophets, and he says, and we say this verse every fast day in the Haftorah, Ashrei enosh ya'aseh zot, uben adam yachazik ba. Fortunate is the man who does this, the human being who holds on to this. What? Shomer Shabbat michalalo, he guards the Shabbos from violating it, v'gomer, etc. Why does Shabbos get special praise? Because it's so integral to the Jewish identity. On the negative side. On the positive side, says the Rambam, v'chol hashomer et Shabbat ki ilchata. Anybody who guards the Shabbos by its law, umechabda u'me'anga kefi kocho, and honors it and gives it pleasure according to his capacity, kvar mefurash b'kabbalah scharo ba'olam hazeh. In the prophets, it's explicit. His reward that he gets in this world, yater al haschar hatzafun la'olam haba, more than the reward that's hidden for him in the next world. Shene'emar, as it says, az, and this is the end of the verse that we quoted before, az tit'anag al Hashem. Then you will experience pleasure with God. And I'm going to let you ride over the heights of the world. I'm going to feed you the inheritance of Jacob your father, because the mouth of Hashem spoke. So a beautiful closing message on the power of Shabbos, how great it is, and how great the reward for one who keeps it is. The Rebbe goes much deeper. He digs, analyzes every single word in this halacha. I'm not going to get too long into it, but the point is the Rebbe says, the Rambam wants to bring out the difference between Shabbos and every other mitzvah. Every other mitzvah, the holiness that it brings upon a Jew is a holiness which is additional to the essential inherent holiness within the Jew because of his soul. That's why if you violate another mitzvah, you still remain Jewish. You're a Rasha, as the Rambam said, but a Rasha among the Jews. Shabbos is different. The relationship of Shabbos to the Jew is one where it gets to the core of the holiness of the Jew. It doesn't bring out extra holiness. It is tied, bound, part and parcel with the etzem holiness of every single Jew. And that's why violating it literally takes away that Jewish identity. It's like idol worship in that way. That's how strict it is. On the flip side, says the Rambam, in the positive side, when you keep Shabbos properly, and he adds the words kefi kocho, not because you only do what you can. Kefi kocho means when you show that Shabbos has become so part of you that you do everything it takes, everything that you can, in the keeping of the Shabbos, then you get a special reward. And the special reward is hinted in the Rambam's words. And the Rambam over here says you get reward in this world in addition to the reward in the next world. Why does the Rambam add that? We already know in Hilchos Shuvah, in the first book of the Rambam, we learned about the reward in the next world. That's the final reward. But why do we care here that the reward in this world is in addition to the reward in the next world? So the Rebbe says the word in addition means that it's just like it. There are also rewards in this world that we get for other mitzvahs. But the Rambam explained in Hilchot Shuvah, those are only there to take away all distractions so that we can serve Hashem properly in this world. When it comes to Shabbos, the reward that we get in this world resembles the reward that we're going to get in the next world. What happens in the next world in Olam Haba? The Rambam says in Hilchot Shuvah, it's the culmination of the dveikut, of the hitkashrut, of the connection that a Jew experiences with God. It's not a means to an end. It's not taking away distractions. It's simply being engaged in a close relationship with God. For Shabbos, since Shabbos gets to the core of the holiness of the Jew, the reward in this world is yater, resembles and is related to the reward that we get in the next world. We experience a godly experience, an experience of closeness with God that's there for its sake and for its sake alone. And the Rambam hints to that by bringing the entire verse. Az titanag al Hashem. You're going to experience pleasure with God, like the pleasure of Olam Haba. Remember in Hilchot Shuvah chapter 8, the Rambam described what's Olam Haba. It's an experience of pleasure. For Shabbos, you also get pleasure. Every other reward for every other mitzvah is related to worldly matters. Here for Shabbos, you go above the heights of the world. The schar, the reward for Shabbat, even in this world, is a beyond, a transcendent type of reward. And that's why it says, V'ha'achalticha nachalat Yaakov avicha. I'm going to give you the reward, the inheritance of Yaakov. Why not Avram and Yitzchak? Because when did the Jews become a Jewish people to the point of no turning back? Was by Yaakov. Avram had a son, Yishmael. Yitzchak had a son, Esav. Yaakov was the only one who had all Jewish children, and from him come the 12 tribes. So Shabbos, which gets to the core of the Jew, and the core of the closeness between God and the Jew, is called the inheritance of Yaakov. The point where the holiness of the Jew was turned on to never turning back. And the Rambam adds the end of the verse, Kipi Hashem diber, again to express that it's not a worldly reward, it's a reward that's transcendent and comes directly from the mouth of Hashem. Brich Rachmanad Dasayan, blessed is the merciful one who has granted us help and assistance. And with this we conclude the entirety of Hilchot Shabbat. Lemazal Tov.